So hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around for our panel. My name is Cassie Winters. I'm a policy analyst at the Office of the Federal Chief Information Officer at the Office of Management and Budget, and I lead our digital accessibility policy. Before we get into the panel, I do just want to do a quick reminder. Please no flash photography. So if you are going to take pictures with your phone, just make sure the flash is off. And we encourage you, if you do see someone with the phone and the flash, just take it and just throw it. Just throw it in the back. So you are okay to do that. Like Siobhan, we will be saving questions to the end. We want to make sure we're engaging with the audience, so please start thinking about your questions now. And then I will go ahead. So our panel is going to talk about what it means to offer accessible digital services. We've already kind of heard about it in this morning's sessions, obviously in the session before this, and then we'll talk about where the United States stands on its accessibility journey. So let me quickly introduce our panel. So on my far right here, Judy Brewer, who is the Assistant Director for Accessibility at the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. And then we have Andrew Nielson, who's the Director of Government-Wide IT Accessibility Program at the General Services Administration. And then finally, she was on our panel before, Jody Leo, who is the Chief Delivery Officer at NAVA. So Judy, I'm going to start with you so we can kind of set the stage here for our audience. Accessibility can mean different things to different people. So could you explain what we mean when we talk about digital accessibility and give us a bit more background on digital accessibility standards?
Okie doke. And let me see if my audio, yeah, okay, great. So pleasure to be here. I want to answer your question, I'm going to go back in time for just a moment, okay? So digital accessibility covers the whole range of technologies that we use to make sure that the digital technologies, but to make sure that those can be used by people with disabilities, because we're here too. If you go back in time many years, Office of Science and Technology's role is to advise the president on matters of science and technology. And as the World Wide Web was starting up in the early 90s, they realized we're going to need to make sure that everybody can use that. So they actually helped pull together industry and governments, multiple governments, to support the creation of the Web Accessibility Initiative at the World Wide Web Consortium, which over the years developed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are the core international standard that's used for not only web, but mobile and other parts of accessible technology. And also staying back in time then, in 1986, even before that, people in federal government got together and said, we're going to need to be able to use the technology in our offices, including graphical user interface and so forth. And they helped create Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act to make sure that the public and federal employees could use technology. So the Office of Science and Technology is looking currently, we moved to modern day, very carefully at the status of Section 508 implementation. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague from GSA, Andrew Nielson. He'll be talking about this rigorous, transparent, government-wide survey on Section 508 so that we can bring up the level. And there's some of us in federal government who are saying, this is almost a 40-year-old law. Wouldn't it be great if we reach full conformance in 2 more years when we hit that anniversary? And in addition, I want to give a shout out to our moderator, Cassie Winters, because she's one of the authors of the memorandum on managing digital accessibility in government services and everything. There's all kinds of good stuff in there to bring things along. For context, I'll just mention 2 other things, which is just last Monday, Department of Justice came out with a rulemaking on the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, web and mobile accessibility for state and local governments to try to get the accessibility level up in the fabric of our daily lives. And then also, I want to give a shout out to people from governments outside of the US, because the effort to take up a common set of standards harmonization is one of the best win-win strategies there for all stakeholders. And there's a very robust effort from many governments to take up a unified approach to digital accessibility. So Cassie, back to you.
So you brought up the new ADA rule. It's great to see, digital accessibility finally taking center stage in many conversations. So Andrew, I did want to turn over to you. Judy had mentioned the government-wide survey. How are we doing? How is the United States doing in meeting its digital accessibility needs?
Well, to put it short, we have room for improvement. To go into a little bit more detail, we asked agencies to answer some questions about their maturity in implementing accessibility across their processes. So we asked questions about the types of characteristics and processes that agencies have that might be indicative of different levels of maturity in areas of technology lifecycle, human capital, training, and some other maturity areas. And we also asked agencies questions about the conformance of their information and communication technologies, specific types of hardware, software, and websites, of course. And we use those questions to give us a simplified view across the board of all of those questions. We use those questions to devise some indices, an index on a 5-point scale for each, from very low to very high, both for that maturity line of questions and the conformance line of questions. And 76% of responding agencies, based on their own self-report and self-assessment, reported only from very low to medium in both of those categories, in maturity and conformance. So the remaining being high or very high. So that just indicates that we have a lot of room for improvement, of course. Our report that we produced, our first annual as of a new congressional requirement a little over a year ago, but we did deliver that report in December, and some more of our data-driven, some of our other data led us to some specific recommendations. We have a number of those. Please go to section 508.gov for the full report. But I'll focus on just a few of our data-driven recommendations to Congress and to agencies. And first is that we need to staff appropriately for Section 508 conformance, for IT accessibility in general. We need to have enough people thinking about it and focusing on it, with a more specific focus on it, and they need to have the right skills. And that goes not only for your Section 508 or IT accessibility program managers, but for all those that really have some responsibility for making our IT accessible. So we need the right skills, we need the right education and awareness. We also need better leadership accountability. We have a lot of fantastic leaders who really care about it, but we're not doing a great job at actually measuring our progress against our accessibility goals and our requirements, our statutory mandate. And more than that, again, for those who are responsible across the board, from the very highest down to the boots on the ground, if you will, we don't do a great job of incorporating accessibility into our performance plans and development plans. So that's another broad area of improvement. And then another way that we can really make a lot of progress is in focusing on targeting our high-use software. Whether we're talking about enterprise email applications, time and attendance, travel and expense systems, those things that we use a lot in our daily work and that are limited to a very limited set of vendors. So we use those a lot. We have an opportunity to make a large impact in the lives of our coworkers and the public if we can work with our partners to make those things more accessible. So those are just, again, 3 of the recommendations. Please go to the full report to get more on how we can make improvements.
Amazing. And yes, I definitely encourage everyone in the room to go to section 508.gov. I rarely give Congress kudos, but it was great to see them include this in one of the appropriations bills, and I think it's going to be a great assessment. It's going to cause real change across our government. So Jody, could you talk about some cases where, we did kind of say there's a ton of room for improvement, but where are we doing well in digital accessibility? Kind of some use cases that we've seen recently.
Sure. I just want to say it's an honor to share the stage with Judy and Andrew today. Judy, I've been following your work since I was very early in my career. All of the standards that you and the W3C have put forward. I mean, yes, I am the Chief Delivery Officer at NAVA, and I can push this down if I had to, but every single person at NAVA is committed to this. And so we need to get to baseline. We need to help achieve that 40-year anniversary, and it is not that hard. One of the examples that we have is actually NAVA got to redesign the American with Disabilities Act website for the Department of Justice, which was saddled down with technology from the late 90s, early aughts, whenever it was a table-based web architecture. And we got started immediately by creating a shell architecture that was mobile responsive, worked across multiple form factors. And then, you know, our engineers use automated testing that every single engineer can use day one. For example, for catching straightforward pre-production problems, Google Lighthouse, using a color contrast checker such as Color Oracle, or even automated browser testing using something like Sauce Labs or Browser Stack. And then finally, they had an A11Y Jira board where they prioritized all of the usability or the key accessibility issues as part of their common workflows. This wasn't moving mountains. This is stuff that you can do today. And then from that baseline, it was the ADA website. So we did go to the full gamut of testing with, you know, users across a variety of assistive technologies, and also interesting user groups like architects. Architects were very interested in contacting the ADA all the time because they wanted to make sure their building plans were compliant. So that's the next level. Let's get to baseline. And when appropriate, I mean, I wish I could do it on everything, make sure you're doing qualitative testing and honoring and caring for those users who rely on assistive technologies to get through the websites. And the last thing I'll say is, one of the biggest things we did for ADA was to put an information synopsis at the top of each page. You know, after all that testing and everything, you know, you're like, oh, that's, you know, an info synopsis? We can all do that. Well, that helps users who rely on screen readers to parse through pages very quickly. And that accessibility makes it easy for everyone to use. So I'll stop there and just, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to share that example with everybody.
Yeah, and you touched on a thing I want to make sure that we do highlight. Is, you know, testing and testing to the baseline. And I did want to just like put a plug in for the ICT testing baseline, which you know, many of our federal agencies use. So I did, like, Andrew, could you kind of, you know, explain what that is and how people can use it, and then we can kind of get into the audience questions.
Yeah, we have a product or a process that we refer to as the ICT accessibility testing baseline. And the purpose there, but you know, most end users, most people are not going to use that thing. But the intent there, while we have great momentum on standardization of standards, we still have wide variance in how we interpret those standards, and in particular how we validate conformance against those standards. And so that ICT accessibility testing baseline is an effort between the U.S. Access Board, the General Services Administration, my program, and other members in our accessibility community to standardize how we validate. And how it can affect your lives is ensure that the tools that you're using and the processes that you're using to validate conformance, whether we're talking about hardware, software, or web, but web in particular at the moment, to make sure that the tools we're using and the processes we're using are sharing the same opinion about whether or not something is actually accessible according to the standards. So more to come on that, but that's one way that we can improve not only the accessibility of our websites, but we can also improve coordination and collaboration as we share information about how to do this right and whether or not something is accessible.
Great. I'll just, a couple more minutes here. Judy, any other thing you want to highlight for testing? I know we've talked about automated testing, obviously the IC testing baseline process.
I think one important thing is to think of digital accessibility testing from a framework of inclusive design and from a framework of disability being a wonderful litmus test for testing. Disability, from a design perspective, is a collection of functional outliers. It's a lot of different capabilities. And the more you're optimizing your products and services for the full range of human variation, the more it works better for everybody in your shop and everybody in the public. And so it's very good to do it, take that lens. And even with the advent of AI and the Biden-Harris administration swift efforts to try to address the Bill of Rights, the executive order, the memo for implementation, there's so many targets we want to hit, such as addressing algorithmic bias and AI, ensuring equitable readout of that. Disability and accessibility are wonderful design lenses for those. And back at W3C, we were doing that for virtual reality. For every different digital technology, there's an opportunity to take that as a lens to improve the service delivery.
Great. So I do want to make sure we leave about 8 minutes left. I want to make sure we engage the audience here. So folks, any questions you want to start out with? I see a woman in the back here. Yes.
Hear me okay?
No, we cannot.
Oh, I have to put it closer. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, so hi, I'm Gwen Gitbayo. I'm at the IRS, and I just had a few quick questions for Judy. So I'm really interested in how the WCAG guidelines were developed. My understanding, and perhaps please tell me I'm wrong, but that there was no actual testing involved in that. There was no randomization to see what was actually better for people in terms of to develop the guidelines. And I also wanted to ask a quick question related to this that is a comment from someone that I work with, Josh Mealy. He's a MacArthur Genius Award winner, and he often complains about that there is kind of a standard that the ADA provides, but it doesn't provide a reasonable kind of experience, like a similar experience. And his favorite example of that is walking up the Capitol buildings and then being in a wheelchair and having to go all around the back and not getting a similar experience of being able to see the mall and being able to see all these things. And I just wondered if you had thoughts about that and kind of what your take is. So thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. And I'm going to answer just very briefly from where I work now rather than where I was working. So one reason that the government here has confidence in taking up the standard from W3C is partly because the process that it went through in development. And so things that are important in developing a technical standard is gathering experience and comments in a completely transparent and open process, as is their required process. And that includes taking in research from many, many different communities. I think the comment that you're saying may have been more true in the past with the first version, probably less so now. And in terms of Josh's comments, and I just saw him a month or so ago, the standards for accessibility in terms of technical accessibility are not a usability standard. What DOJ has taken up there, what's used in Section 508, is not for usability. The best experience comes through the kind of work that Jody does, where she's looking at usable accessibility and making sure that one is following the technical guidance to make sure that things don't break, that there aren't doors closed in your face, with regard to accessibility, but then turning that into a useful experience. So that I hope that answer helps. Happy to chat after.
Great. Question here?
Thanks. My name is John. I work for the United States Department of Health and Human Services. I have a broader operational perspective, not a specific technological or CIO sort of perspective. I'm a broader operational officer. And in my view, one of the challenges we confront in terms of 508 accessibility, and this is true of lots of different things, is the unfunded mandate portion of it. It's very time intensive, it's very resource intensive. And oftentimes as a manager, I'm asked to trade off 508 accessibility versus, other elements of accomplishing the mission. I recognize that it's a mandate, but being told that it's a mandate is insufficient to be able to answer the question. Is there any broader attention at the congressional level or within the OMB about shunting not just mandates in the direction of agencies, but actually resources for accessibility in the direction of agencies? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to address that question. I think your question and your statement, your observation and frustration is not uncommon. That's something that we hear quite broadly. And what I would invite you to do, I can't speak to movement in Congress or considerations as to whether or not they will specifically shunt funding and resources. I will maybe let Cassie comment on OMB's direction related to agency budgets to support Section 508 implementation. But what I would invite you how I would invite you to approach Section 508 conformance is to think about, you're absolutely right, it's expensive to fix it if we didn't do it right in the first place. And that's true, as you said, for any number of issues, whether we're talking about security or whatever the requirement is. But if we do it right in the first place, if we build accessibility into our process, it really is, maybe there's a marginal additional effort, but it's so very marginal. If it's part of how we do business, but that's going to require that you ensure that the people that are working for you have the right skills and knowledge. You have to recruit correctly, you have to train and develop correctly, and there is cost there. But that doesn't all have to be borne by you or your program or your agency. If we also encourage our educational institutions when they're exiting degree-seeking programs or boot camps, that they're exiting those with the right skills. And so we need to recruit for those, we need to train for those, and we need to build it into our process. Our definition of done, if we use the Agile term, should include that thing needs to be accessible. And if we do that all along the way, it really is no more expensive or time intensive, at least in my opinion.
If I may just explain one of the other reasons why I love the memo on managing digital accessibility, and also a companion memo on the 21st Century IDEA Act, is because it puts accessibility in a context with everything else you need to do on your website. It's not an afterthought or an extra thing. It's part of customer experience. You need to make your websites accessible. It's part of technology modernization and so forth. And for many years, I think accessibility was the afterthought. What we're seeing now is this is a normal part. It's a business as usual. And again, if you're doing it from the beginning, the cost is far, far lower. There's economies of scale with that, as with each of the other aspects. Don't know if that helps, but that's the perspective that I think is helpful.
So we have about maybe time for one or two more questions right here.
Hi, I'm Jill Marlowe. I'm the Digital Transformation Officer at NASA. And as you might imagine, I spend a bit of time in the emerging technology space. So your comment on extended reality caught my attention. I'm wondering about things like extended reality or model-based methods, or maybe technologies we haven't thought of yet. What are your best practices for kind of building these considerations in by design up front, rather than kind of trying to address them on the back end?
Wonderful question, and I'm really happy to hear that you're thinking that way. And it's been fascinating working in the digital technology and digital accessibility field for decades. And particularly on the web, you watch everything converge onto the web, and they go through changes as that happens. And so it's some of the things that Andrew was saying, I would just go, yes, what he said. It's like if you're building people into your processes from the very start, if you make sure you're hiring a diverse team, including people who are using technology in different ways, and then also, structured external output on that, bringing in experts on that. But accessibility is something that maybe is harder to do if it's forgotten till the end stage. But every new technology that comes along becomes a more robust and useful experience for everyone if you get that innovation of trying to meet the different functional needs up front. So have fun with that.
Well, and I would add, while perhaps our technical standards might not have caught up yet and may not soon, with the advent of new technologies, emerging technologies, our design principles are still very foundational and very applicable, and meaning, include individuals with disabilities in your requirements and in your needs and in your design. And those design principles really do apply in emerging technologies, XR in particular.
Yeah, one thing I'll say to that too is, in my experience, including the voices that are not your typical average voices into the mix means you're taking ideas that work in one place and you're transmitting them and transferring them into another. And to me, that's where real breakthroughs can take place. So when you're talking about new and emerging technologies, welcoming those voices is one of the things you can do to actually have breakthroughs.
And with that, we are done with questions. So I appreciate this conversation. A few takeaways for me: awareness, just general awareness. It's great that we were able to talk about accessibility today. The session this morning talked about secure by design, accessible by design. I mean, these are things that should be considered at the front. Let's keep shifting left. And it is a part of the entire customer experience. So please, let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you all.